This is November 28, 2014, and it's the third part of what I'm describing with being set up to be raped from a seated position. And this is also something that was practiced in England. There were some individuals over there that were involved in training me for that response there as well. But most of it, that I was much younger for that part of it. But most of it that I remember was like repeated attempts was in Washington State and Oregon State. And on these different rape scenarios, they were also using different locations, kind of like one of the men that they later used to rape me was from Oregon. That was Robin Bechtold. Another one was from California. That was Mike Tanzer. He used the standing up situation. Robin used the seated situation, and then another one after that. And then they, I don't know, they sort of, it was sort of a Northwest kind of a thing, but also did include England in what they were doing for developing these ideas. So, and Canada. And Canada actually attempted to elicit a similar response for me when I had my baby and I went there for political asylum later. So the key words were, "I'll take you home," along with a hand signal after they made me touch their penis. Put their hand on my hand on their penis. And then they would have a specific expression, look straight ahead when they said, "I'll just take you home." They wouldn't look at me like engaged in conversation. They would get a mad look. And I was told to watch for this look. If someone looked directly at me and said this, it supposedly meant to maybe I wasn't going to get raped, maybe just wait and see what happened next. But if they looked straight ahead, it meant, okay, I'm mad at you, and you're going to get beat up and tortured if you don't do this. Jumped, killed, and they were threatening to kill me, in addition to everything else. So that's what, then later, when I was in high school, Robin Bechtold, whose father was involved in all of this, I didn't recognize his dad or his family, or any of them, because it had been, a decade or so since I'd seen any of them. Didn't really expect the United States government to just be moving me around to places where I was going to be in harm's way all over again, just for that point. And, even though I had all these horrendous things happen to me, I was living in a world where reality for most people is that you don't get set up to have those things happen to you. And you don't get thrust to go into the same high school with a bunch of government kids whose parents practiced harm against you for a long time. So, even though I was tortured so much and had all these things happen, I didn't recognize people later, and because it had been so long, and then I also just living in a natural world where the norm is not that, and seeing what the norm was for everyone else, I assumed for myself, or wanted to believe as a defense mechanism, that the norm for everyone else was also true for me. Maybe some things happened to me in my past, but I'd rather not think about it. I'd like to think that the norm for me is what I see happen, with everyone else. So my defense mechanism was to try to forget about things, and I was told to forget about things. I was told, if you keep thinking about this after we do this, like after they'd electrocute me at my house or attack me in the car, they'd hit me on the head with a hard object and knock me out. If I tried to bring something up, same thing. But this idea of I'll take you home, even though they eventually, for whatever reason, they eventually made it into this idea that I would get electrocuted at my house. Initially, for the longest periods of several years of training me in that specific kind of condition, it was an immediate attack response against me. And that's what those words meant. That's what the word meant, along with the cues that were specific to that situation. So basically, then Robin took me out one day in his car. I was sitting in the passenger seat. He used all, I had not, he had never done something before like this, and he was kind of mad at me. I was actually in a situation where maybe I thought I could be his friend, but he was sort of moody. I didn't necessarily wasn't in love with him at all. And I didn't think about his family or who he was, or recognize it at the time. So then one day he took me out to get something to eat, or to talk or something. And I think it was to get something to eat. And I was in the car, in the passenger side, and all of a sudden he did all of the exact same things that were cues from the United States government that his father had practiced. And when I saw his face and his jaw set and looking mad, looking straight ahead, after all the cues were followed in an order that they had practiced for such a long time, I then gave him a blowjob. I didn't give anybody blowjobs. I hadn't done anything sexual to anyone since I was about 13 or 14 years old, from the last time I got raped. And from that point, when I was maybe 13, I considered myself to be a virgin. I had never voluntarily or willingly, ever on my own, wanted to engage in any of these ideas or activities with any of these people. I wanted to have a normal life and to be married, and I considered myself to be a virgin because I didn't ask for any of these things to happen to me. So then all of a sudden, he was pulling this whole government thing out on me. And I remember I gave him a blowjob, and then, almost in shock, I still remember how I felt, that I was almost displacing myself because I was in shock. And then afterwards, I just felt sick. I mean, I felt sick the entire time. But then my whole cue was that I'm supposed to pretend now that none of this ever happened. I didn't do this. He didn't do it. He did. And people, and I'm just supposed to pretend that, oh, I'm just friends with him and I like him, and, no big deal. Well, I broke up. I told him I didn't want to go out with him anymore. And that, I said maybe we would hang out as friends. But I wasn't interested in him. And he just was very persistent and tried to appeal to appeal to me emotionally in the ways that the government told him to try to appeal to me. And I didn't have a lot of friends either, because the government deprived me of actually having normal friends. So I was kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place, basically, with having to have certain friends that the government forced on me, or be absolutely completely by myself. So occasionally, I would be friends with him and do things with him or talk to him on the phone. But then what happened is he, right after that happened and I had a reaction, I think they thought that I remembered some things from the past. And that is when the United States government coordinated one of their attacks against me to try to murder me. And it was a brake failure situation where they had programmed me to be driving a car, since I was a very little kid, and to mix up the brake pedals in a situation of panic when I saw someone behind me with a knife, like behind me in another car with a knife, or in the back seat of my own car with a knife, and or trying to shove me off the road. If I got shoved off the road, then in a panic reaction, they had coached me to hit the acceleration of the car instead of the brakes. So pumping the brakes to try to stop the car slowly. And so I was coming back from his house, and I called my parents' house to let them know I was on my way, so I had made a phone call to let them know. And just a few, I said I gave them the time too, I said in probably about 45 minutes. And it was then at that point I had a car coming up from behind me, ran me off the road. I believe hit my car, but it was kind of grazed. It wasn't like a big, I don't remember hearing like a really loud noise, but it was close enough to hit me and forced me off the road into a ditch. And then it was like a big ditch where, you crash. And my reaction was one that the government had worked on me with in England, in Canada, and in the United States. And it was to panic, to try to correct the situation, and basically to gun it rather than trying to stop the car. And in that kind of situation, they called it, in a roundabout way, brake failure, because I failed to use my brakes. So it wasn't like the brakes went out mechanically, it was that I failed to use the brakes when I needed to, and instead I gunned it. So they would, then the hope was that I would gun it right into a telephone pole next to the bank on the side of the road. I gun it into a house, I gun it into a fence, into a post, into anything. What happened is when I hit the acceleration, I gunned it, and the car ended up going at that high of a speed when I hit it like that. Ended up going up a guy wire of a telephone pole instead of into the telephone pole, and was propped up like this, like here's a telephone pole. I was supposed to run into it, and instead it caught the guy wire here, and it ran up. And then got stuck like that. And then there were trees in the back. The reason it didn't tip over, there were trees in the back that held it up. I had to claw my way out and jump down several feet from there. And when the cops came, nobody reported it. And when the crane people came to get the car down, nobody made a record of it. And the cops that showed up on the scene were all cops that were involved with the Bechtold family.